Welcome to the Dr. Bergson's Best Health radio show. I'm going to call this show a Bergson baguette, or a bag of stuff, because I thought I'd go over a variety of things that are coming out on the horizon, and they all seem very interesting to me. I think I could do about 100 shows like this. So you have to give me some feedback at info@drlindsaybergson.com if you enjoy this. Plus, I am launching my membership this week. So if you go to my website, drlindsaybergson.com, you can take a look by how you can have more interaction with me if that is one thing that you would like to do. So I saw this great joke, and we're all so complicated today. The joke had Jesus ready to hand out loaves and fishes to the masses. But if he were to do that today, it had people with little talk bubbles over their head. One saying, "Is the fish polluted?" The other one saying, "I'm a vegan." Another one saying, "Does that bread have gluten?" How do we get well but not be so complicated? You know, I think that if you are an ill person, you have to make very stringent, disciplined strategies. But if you are a healthy person, there are spectrums with which you can operate. For example, I don't eat gluten most of the time, but sometimes I'll have sourdough where the gluten is broken down because I can handle that. And I am not, at this point in my life, cross fingers, an ill person. It's interesting how there's so much information and it all intertwines and it can get very complicated, and you want to get knowledge to be powerful and healed, but at the same time, we don't want to stay so complicated. The state of health is feeling so well, you can just leave it behind you and go forward with your life. So we're always on the teeter-totter of learning and operating to get as much details to be the best that we can be, but not getting so complicated that we're fearful of every move we make. And it's just overwhelming and stressful to try and attend to all the details we think we need to do to be well. So it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act. But peace does come, and I really have been facing this head on in the pandemic. It comes from acceptance. Learning to accept what is. That's huge. And not being attached to what you don't have, what isn't. Learning to accept what is and not being attached to what isn't, while at the same time working toward what you would prefer. But acceptance is very freeing. If you're ill and you got to do a lot of stuff right now to get well, if you just kind of accept it and do one or two things at a time, it's less stressful and complicated. Life is complicated, but it's important to accept the isness of it all and not let the complication get you. We have to kind of get over ourselves. It's so hard to get over ourselves. It's like a lifelong pursuit to get over ourselves, yet at the same time, we have to attend to ourselves. So how do we make sure we're doing everything right, from flossing our teeth and eating 5 to 10 vegetables a day, and yet not taking ourselves so seriously that we're stressed out and we can't really have space for fun and connection, the true vitamin C. It's a balancing act. It's all a balancing act. But I do think besides acceptance, there is the healing energetic of graciousness. When you meet a gracious person and you can feel it, when you can be in the company of graciousness, when you can allow yourself that huge, expansive sensation of graciousness, it's so good for the soul, for you, for me, for both of us. So I try and live a life that's not just about food and nutrients, not just about exercising and making sure that all my T's are crossed and my I's are dotted. I try and allow space for graciousness. And how I do that is by laughing and smiling. I know many of you know that I have a rowing machine, which I put in front of my new, which I purchased on Black Friday, my big Sony TV. For me, it's big. It's 55 inches or 60 inches. And I watch comedies. And that's something that's been uplifting for me to help me have acceptance and graciousness within the midst of the chaos. And what's interesting is an article came out, and this article came out in PLOS ONE just a week or two ago, called Does Laughing Have a Stress Buffering Effect in Daily Life? An intensive longitudinal study. So they did a deep dive. Let's do a deep dive into laughing. And what they found is if you could laugh frequently every day, just even a giggle. It didn't have to, the intensity of the laugh. They had a laugh intensity machine somehow monitoring if you laughed really a big belly laugh or you just did a feminine little giggle or a manly one big ha. None of that made a difference. As long as you laughed, it reduced stress. They found that even smiling was a proven stress reducer. So that's something, if you are trying to figure out how to cross all your T's, dot all your I's, do everything right, but you don't want to take yourself so seriously, you want to have room for graciousness, you can, even if something's awful, just make your lips smile or just make yourself have a little ha-ha, and that does put an elbow into the belly of stress. I also thought there was another very interesting article. It's the first randomized trial that succeeded in demonstrating the advantages if two people are at odds with each other to meeting in the middle, to kind of having mediation. And what they discovered is that arguing is bad for your brain. And we all know that we live in a very shrill environment at the moment, but that the study showed that resolving differences or meeting in the middle or mediation lights up reward and higher executive functioning areas in the brain that promote a healthier and a more grounded brain. Dr. Perlmutter, who opened the clinic where I now work doing telemedicine recently, but I hope to be going there in September in Florida, his newest book is called Brainwash. I hope to get him on the show as soon as he's not on his boat hiding away from the pandemic. Sounds idyllic, though. He says that because there are so many toxins in the environment and because people are allowing themselves to be trigger reactive so often, people are meeting each other more from their reptilian primitive brains rather than from their higher executive brains. And when you respond angry. I remember there was a video this morning from Canada of some man whose food in a Chinese restaurant didn't come in the time he thought it should. So he was screaming his guts out at the people who are running around trying to get the food for curb service. You know, they're not used to having food in curb service. It's probably a new thing for them. Maybe they have less people working there. And we think of Canadians as having it together and being so polite. That anger, that you're so frustrated, all you can do is scream and yell. That's a reptilian triggered reactive brain. And then what it does is it lights up the reptilian ancient primitive parts of the brain. And if you do that over and over again, it trains the grooves of your brain to go less and less to the higher executive functioning. What this article found is that when couples argue, now, lots of people are arguing these days, whether it's about masks, whether it's about protests, whatever it is, people are arguing here in the United States. When we react excessively to situations such as going postal, then what happens is that the brain health is damaged in all. But if you can figure out a way to meet in the middle, then there is a biologic brain signature that comes from calming your brain down. Now, I just think that that's really extraordinary. And I remember that there was a town meeting once when Stephen Hawking was still alive. He had ALS, but he was still a professor at Cornell, and he spoke through that vocalization machine. And President Clinton at the time was holding a town meeting, and he invited a lot of scientists to discuss the future of humanity. And he was asking Stephen Hawking, where do you think mankind is going? What do you think's going to happen? And he said something that I've never forgotten. He said, I think that as we move forward in the next 20, 30 years, and that was at least 15, 20 years ago, but I'm not very good with timing, so I think it was about 15, 20 years ago. He said, mankind's going to start to go down two paths. And there's going to be the people who operate from their higher brain executive functioning, and there's going to be the people who operate more from their reptilian brains. And the people who live life from that higher function, eat better, exercise, all the things that caretake your brain, keep a better weight. When you're larger, it's alarmingly brain damaging because it reduces the circulation to your brain. I have several blogs out on that at my website, drlindsayberkson.com. But he said there'll be two streams of humanity, one where they're living from their higher brain anatomical areas, and the other where they're living from their lower brain anatomical areas. The more endocrine disruptors that you're exposed to, especially before conception and during birth and breastfeeding, that all affects whether the child will be able to more facilely operate from a higher brain functioning or lower brain functioning. So I thought that this article was so interesting. When you live a life of mediation, not of entitlement, not of shrill, not of trigger anger, your brain benefits and goes to the high road. The name of this study was Impact of Couple Conflict in Mediation on How Romantic Partners Are Seen, and they looked at, it was a functional MRI study, so they were taking a look at brains when people were arguing or brains when people were meeting in the middle. And it was published in the journal Cortex, where that makes a lot of sense, and that just came out a few weeks ago. And what's interesting to kind of pull into all of this is you might think, well, all that's well and good, but I'm single and by myself and lonely, and everybody else seems to have a family and a partner, and so I have every right to be sitting here and feeling unhappy, and if I want to operate from my lower reptilian brain, I just will. But another study came out that was from Michigan State. It came out a few weeks ago in the Journal of Positive Psychology. Who knew there was a journal named that? The article was called Loved and Lost or Never Loved at All, Lifelong Marital Histories and Their Links with Subjective Well-Being. And it showed that happiness doesn't depend on being married or partnered, that happiness was a mindset. It was a mindset that you discipline and train your mind to come from. So you have a variety of levels of neural functioning, and you can train yourself where you want to come from, and it has a lot to do with how you interact with others and how you control the sensations that you feel and how you resolve things, because every time you have a positive resolution, it lights up the higher executive functioning. And I think at a time like this is something that we need to be talking about, thinking about, because there's chaos out there. And of course we feel it, but we can also have our own planet inside of us with more control over that atmosphere and that terrain. One of the things that I thought was really great was we all know that there's lots of information now that the biome in your large colon and the microbial life in your gut affect the microbial life and functioning of your brain. So if you eat better, that makes it easier to go the high road of your brain. But a study came out that gut microbes also shape the antibodies that we make even before we're affected by a virus or a pathogen. This came out from Nature, one of the most respected medical journals, a few weeks ago, and it was called Mucosal or Systemic Microbiota Exposure Shape the B-Cell Repertoire. And what that means is, the translation in English is that our ability to respond to viruses has a lot to do with the health of our biome, and that has everything to do with our diet. I teach in the gastroenterology module in the 4 or 5 year certification program for practitioners like medical doctors and nurse practitioners and pharmacists to become functional docs. It's a 4 or 5 year program. And we show that just eating 1 to 2 days of a healthier diet makes you have a healthier biome right away. Nature's so generous, so generous. There are studies where families have gone off all foods that have chemicals and eaten organically, and they measure their pesticides, herbicides, and all other kinds of pollutants in their body. And within 2 weeks, they have almost no identifiable endocrine disrupting compounds. So positive action, though it may be hard to discipline yourself to do it and become regular about it, the benefits are pretty rapid. Nature is generous, and they really matter. So there was one study that showed that people that have abnormal liver tests, like their liver enzymes are elevated, they have fatty liver, they have hepatic disease, if they get COVID, they tend to do worse. So what I might do ahead of time, so you could be strategic, is if you know you have fatty liver disease, if you know that you have elevated enzymes, and I don't even like to see most of the liver enzymes in the high 20s, even though that's still in the normal range. So I like to see them more in the teens. You can start taking milk thistle, and you can start eating a lot more colorful vegetables, especially the purple foods like purple cabbage, purple berries. Those all help the liver very much. But milk thistle several times a day in the pandemic if you've got a history of liver disease. And this came from liver tests in COVID-19, a retrospective observational cohort study of almost 2,000 patients in a major U.S. hospital network. And it was published in Hepatology, which means it's the liver journal. So people with liver disease, if you get COVID, you could have a worse time. So don't wait to get COVID. Start doing positive things for the liver. Milk thistle is a wonderful herb that's been shown to enhance liver regeneration and liver function. The liver is very responsive to positive, healthy actions that you do. It's one of the most regenerative and responsive organs that we have, but it certainly responds to healthy eating, healthy foods, and to the herb milk thistle. It also responds to rosmaric acid. I know Standard Process has a really great product called Livco, where they mix together the two things, the milk thistle and the rosmaric acid. If I had elevated enzymes or fatty liver and it was COVID, I would be on these things right now. Also, artichoke is very, very healthy for liver to get it back on its track. So you can get artichoke paste at most grocery stores if you can't make artichokes, and just take a teaspoon a day. That's really good for liver health. And we also know that people who have sleep apnea tend to have more fatty liver, so you want to make sure that your sleep is good, because unhealthy sleep can show up in unhealthy liver. Everything is so connected, and it's all about learning which dots you need to connect to get yourself on the path of where you want to go. Well, big news. In fact, I put this in my Facebook blog, which are moving next week into my private membership. So go to drlindseyberkson.com and sign up for my free tribe so you know how to participate in the membership if you want to. But I wrote that this was happening, and somebody told me they even read about this in Switzerland, and another person said they read about it in a paper in Germany. The American Heart Association, good for them. Of course, it's several decades late. Kudos to them. But they have been saying that when you go in to see a cardiologist, they urge you to get an evaluation of your diet at your routine heart checkup. What a novel concept. Of course, chiropractors, naturopaths, functional practitioners, nutritionists, and dietitians, let's all be one big happy family here, have been doing this for decades. And I know people get very territorial about medicine. No one else should talk about nutrition but dietitians. No one else should talk about nutrition except medical doctors. Now that we see it's important, we want to own it. But there was one state where the governor just made certified CrossFit trainers able to discuss nutrition legally in that state, when I don't even think chiropractors can discuss nutrition in that state. Everybody's so ill and eating so poorly. Why doesn't everybody talk about nutrition? Let's scream it from the rooftops. Let's allow it for everybody. Let's not have anyone own it as a real estate terrain. Let's let everybody talk about nutrition. But this came out just last week, called Rapid Diet Assessment Screening Tools for Cardiovascular Disease Risk reduction. So they say if you can look at your diet, you can reduce your heart disease risk across healthcare settings. A scientific statement from the American Heart Association. It was published in one of their major journals called Circulation, Cardiovascular Quality and Outcomes 2020. They say, look at your diet, it affects your heart. Wow. Now that's a huge connect the dot, which didn't anyone get this memo like 55 years ago? I don't know. I was at a Theosophy Society meeting. I think you've heard this when I was 16 or 17, and Scott Nearing said, you are what you eat, and the better you eat now, the better your tomorrow and later. So I did. But right now in 2020, the Heart Association is saying that, and let's let everybody talk to their patients about nutrition. Why should anyone, certainly the dietitians haven't saved us. Certainly the family practice docs and internists haven't saved us. We're a broken system, so let's let everybody talk about nutrition. And there's lots of different opinions about nutrition. It's really finding the path for you in this moment of time in your life. So it's good to hear what everybody's got to say. Nobody owns the real estate on nutrition, but we know that the way you eat affects you rapidly. Nature is generous about that, and it affects all systems in your body, from your heart to your brain, to the way you can fight off COVID. I had a cardiologist on the show last week. I kept trying to have her give us a little bit more sophisticated answers, but she kept saying, get back to the basics, eat better, and that's what will protect your heart and your ACE receptors more from the spike proteins of COVID. But yes, so the American Heart Association is now saying this. But it's not just food of what you eat, right? It's not just food of what you eat. What does that mean? What is she saying? She's sipping on scotch again. No, this is water with lemon in it. Air is the new food. What we inhale influences us like what we eat. Air is the new food. And there was a fascinating article. Now we're at home so much more, and many of our homes are airtight, and they're outgassing. They're outgassing formaldehydes from the engineered wood floors. They're outgassing volatile organic pollutants from the paints. They're outgassing mercury from the gypsum, from the what do they call that board? That goes over the wood. Why can I not think about that right now? But you're sitting in a home and it's constantly filled with chemicals. And you inhale these chemicals, or the baby that's on the floor puts the objects in their mouth so they can be swallowing these chemicals. And these chemicals make a difference just like food makes a difference. And this article that really struck me came out in brain pathology, and they were looking at how to keep your brain healthier. And if you inhale air that has fine particulate matter or pollution and fine particulate matter, it can be inhaled through the nose, go up through the cribriform plate, cross the blood-brain barrier, which is almost like its own endocrine organ, that we could do a whole entire show on the blood-brain barrier, and it gets into the brain, causing inflammation and even Lewy body formation and possible Parkinsonian changes. So when you're at home, open up windows here and there throughout the day to just ventilate. Get some freestanding air filters. They're made by IQ Air, Air Doctor, Santa Fe Air, Austin Air. There are all kinds of freestanding, very sophisticated HEPA air filters. I have IQ air filters in my home. If you go to my website, Products We Love, I have a link that you can reach them and chat with them and find out about it. But they're a little pricey, so you can go on Craigslist, and most of my patients can find the whole entire body of the filter and then buy their own new filters, which is much cheaper. So usually someone's moving out of town, and you can buy this air filter that's anywhere from $800 to $1,000 for $100, and then buy your own brand new filters. There's 3 or 4 that insert into this housing unit. So if you can't do that, then at least open windows all over the place here and there. open windows and at least have a Berkey air filter. I've also got that under Products I Love because it's $50 and it helps remove a lot of chemicals in the water that are released into your air when you take a hot shower and have a lot that get it up through your nose, into your brain, and affect brain health. Lewy body formation can set up Parkinsonian-like pathology or kind of Alzheimer's cognitive decline-like pathology. But it's interesting. So the name of the article, they name a number of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and they say signaling, so pro-inflammatory molecules are induced by intranasal infusion that regulates alpha-synuclein pathology in the olfactory bulb. So they were able to show that when you inhale dirty air, you can get Parkinsonian-like changes in your brain because air is the new food. And we're all staying at home. And I don't know if you remember, but the EPA did a 10-year set of studies called the TEAM studies. And they wanted to know where we get most of our pollution. So they put these monitors that were sensitive to pollution on people. They had a representative sample, a little under 4,000 Americans. And they had people wear these for years. And then they monitored where did we get most of our pollution that you'd be breathing in. And the bad news was it was your home, but the good news was it was your home because at home you could do something about it. So you want to take your shoes off at the front door. You want to constantly clean. You want to get rid of carpets slowly if you can and have more tile or wood floors. But mostly you want to ventilate, open windows here and there. Oh, even if the air conditioning is on, open it a little bit, then close it. The next day, open another one and close it so that there's circulation and a lot of the stuff that you don't want to be breathing up into your brain is going out of the house. And I think one of the last things that we're going to talk about, we have two more things that I really want to talk about. One of the ones is zinc in your immune system. And everyone's been talking about zinc because the Marseille study out of France that looked at hydroxychloroquine, they really were able to tamp down the COVID viral load if they added zinc to the hydroxychloroquine. And we hear that zinc stops viruses from replicating. And that's the whole idea of a virus taking the best of you as it starts to grow out of control inside your body. So I wanted to make a few comments about zinc because zinc apparently is not that easy, even if you swallow a zinc pill, to get deep inside your tissues and cells, in particular your red blood cells and your lung cells. So after the discovery of zinc deficiency in the 60s, it became very, very clear that zinc was essential for your immune system to work just right. And you have two basic immune systems. Your first one so that's why COVID, you can kind of look at the first 5 to 7 to 10 days of getting the COVID infection. Your innate immune response takes off, but it also leans on zinc. And then if you still have the infection, then your adaptive immune system takes off, but it's still dependent on zinc. So all of your immune responses are dependent on zinc, the early ones and the later ones. But the thing of it is that zinc is in your bloodstream outside cells, and it's a little bit hard for zinc to cross the cell membrane and bind to molecules inside of the cell to act with all the benefit that it should act. So there are elements called zinc ionophores, ionophore, ionophores, that activate the ability of zinc to get into the cell and keep it there where it can turn off nasty viral replication and make your immune system hum just right. Well, it turns out that these zinc helpers, kind of like zinc hamburger helpers, are quercetin, and which is one of my very, very favorite products. In fact, the one that I'm really liking right now is by a company called Perk, called Repair Guard, because it's got pomegranate, which I love, and it's got 1,000 milligrams of quercetin, which is a very high dose of quercetin, and a number of other marvelous cofactors. But it's not that easy to get zinc in, so you want some quercetin on board, which also helps fight viruses, and you also want every now and then to have green tea, because the polyphenolic compounds of green tea also help zinc be utilized by the cell and by your immune system and to stop viral replication. And also there are metals, metallothioneins inside the cell that have to be in balance with the zinc. And most common of that is copper. So if you have excessive copper from having copper pipes or you're taking too much copper supplementation and some multivitamin, it might lower the ability of zinc to do its protective immune actions in your body. So when I see a patient in the first intake, we usually run their red blood cell levels of zinc and copper and molybdenum and manganese. Manganese also helps your body fight all kinds of viruses. It's very important in immune system functioning, as well as magnesium, molybdenum, manganese, zinc, and copper and selenium. It's good to know what is inside the red blood cell. They're a little bit more expensive tests than the serum tests, but they tell you if the mineral got in and the balance of all of those minerals or metals to each other. So zinc is something to think about in this time, but if you just take zinc out of a bottle, it doesn't mean that you're absorbing it. So and what's interesting is hydroxychloroquine, which of course has been in the news as a possible drug, and it's had some articles that say it doesn't work and some articles that say that it's hard on the heart, but those articles were 4 times the dosage you normally use, and those articles were retracted. It's been politicized. But what's interesting about hydroxychloroquine is that it's also a zinc ionophore. It helps zinc go into the cell to block viral replication. So this was the thinking of the Marseille, the initial scientists in France that started to take a look at using hydroxychloroquine and an antibiotic and zinc, is they wanted to make sure the zinc got in the cell, and they were using hydroxychloroquine as a zinc ionophore to get it into the cell. And then also hydroxychloroquine accumulates in the lungs, which some people suggest blocks the ability of the S spike protein of COVID to then attach into the lungs. So that's pretty interesting to understand. If you're going to take zinc, you need to take some zinc hamburger helpers. And now zinc has anti-inflammatory actions, antioxidative actions. It's well replicated that it blocks virus replication. But how do you know if you're getting enough zinc? Are there any besides running a red blood cell level? So I'm going to give you some symptoms or signs that you might not have sufficient zinc. So usually the old saying was, if you didn't have enough zinc, your feet would stink. So stinky feet, even though you take showers and you wash up and you're not running 10 miles and keeping those shoes on. So stinky feet when the circumstances don't support that, easy scarring from even minor wounds, recurrent white spots on your fingernails where there wasn't any trauma, poor hormone health or difficulty to respond to hormone interventions because all hormones bind to their receptors based on the shape of the receptor, and zinc gives those receptors the shape to let hormones do their signals. In sex steroid hormones, it's called a zinc finger on the DNA binding domain. There are 2 little atoms of zinc that look a little bit like a finger, and the hormone can be pulled into the binding domain like a parking spot and deliver its signal to the gene in the cell. But also transmembrane receptors that sit on the outside of cells need to have the right shape. Those aren't really a zinc finger, but they still have zinc to give them the right shape. So hormones deliver their signals successfully based on shape shifting, and zinc is intimately involved with that. So if your hormones up and down and in and out and sideways, that could very well be that you don't have enough zinc, even if your hormone levels are perfect, because they can't signal if there isn't enough zinc because the shape is not right. The brain has the highest concentration of zinc in the body. And that's because hormones really rule the brain. I'm giving a talk this week actually on hormones in the brain. And zinc is flush in the brain for many of the actions that we've been talking about to protect the brain, but also to allow hormones to do their magic on the brain. And they couldn't do that unless there was zinc giving the right shape for hormones to deliver their signal. And in fact, one of the many reasons, there's a variety of reasons for chemo brain, is that chemo rinses out the lining of the gut, and your digestion for a while is just not as great as it could be. I don't know why all chemo patients aren't given digestive enzymes right off the bat, or leucovorin, which is a drug designed for patients on chemo that helps them hold folate into the lining of the gut to keep it healthier. I think all cancer patients should really be on that drug designed for cancer patients called leucovorin. It also helps you hold zinc in there, by the way, but it mainly holds folate. Well, when you have chemo brain and you can't digest as well, your zinc levels easily get insufficient and your brain can't think that well. So brain fog can be due to zinc insufficiency. It's not the only thing that can cause brain fog. You could have it from hypothyroidism and many other things, but zinc plays a role in neuroplasticity and healthy brain functioning. So that's something for you to know. And of course, if you're really, really overweight, excessive body weight has an alarming impact on the brain, and higher BMI is linked to decreased blood flow to the brain and a much higher risk of Alzheimer's disease and mental illness. And that's just, so they don't just call this COVID-19, they're calling it COVID-15 too, because people are gaining on an average 15 pounds, and 15 pounds is enough to start reducing circulation to your brain. So I just bought a floor sample of an elliptical over at Academy and paid some sons of some friends to help get it up my stairs, because you just got to keep working to not let your body hold on to too much fat, because that fat dings your brain. And then you become, like Stephen Hawking said, which path of brain functioning do you want to go down, the reptilian brain or the higher brain? I wanted to make one comment on vitamin D. Besides being helpful in the pandemic, an article came out that's pretty extraordinary. It's called The Prevention of Benign Paroxysmal Positional Vertigo. So some people get vertigo, which is a horrific situation to go through. And it's a vestibular issue, and hardly anybody knows what the vestibular system is, or doctors know how to examine it, or when it's going wrong. And more as people, as they get older, the vestibular system ages. Sometimes it has to do with crystals in your ears. And it's a very specific form of vertigo called benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. Positional meaning usually a physical therapist can turn your head in a way to change those crystals so that you can get over your bouts of vertigo, but they tend to recur. And this article came out in Neurology, and they gave, if a person with this recurrent benign paroxysmal positional vertigo had a vitamin D level below 20, then they gave them 400 international units of vitamin D twice a day with some minerals with a little bit of calcium in it, and pretty much they got rid of recurrent benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. So I wanted to make a comment on that. And then this is where we're going to close with the last, there's so many things to talk about, but this is our closing commentary. I'm going to take a sip of my lemon stevia water here. I have to talk about this. This did not make headline news. This article was headed, the lead author on this article is David Brownstein. I've had him on the show a number of times. The Kabbalah says there's only 36 true men that walk the planet at any moment, and I think David Brownstein is one of those men. He wrote on his website that he has been using natural answers to treat viral issues, and the FTC wrote him this letter and shut down 20 years of his videos and his blogs. He was so upset. He's got a wonderful wife who's a very smart lawyer. She talked him out of not going into immediate retirement. So what he did was he then went and published his data. So I'm going to close this show with an article that should have made headline news, should have been on Fox News, cable news, everybody's news, but it wasn't on anybody's news because it was 107 patients with COVID, and none of them ended up being intubated, seriously ill, or dying, all with natural answers. So this was published by David Brownstein. He was the lead author, and a number of people on his staff were also part of the authors, and even his wife, the lawyer, was part of this article. It was published in Clinical and Translational Research about a week ago, I think. And it's called A Novel Approach to Treating COVID-19 Using Nutritional and Oxidative Therapies. And the object was a case series of consecutive patients diagnosed with COVID treated with nutritional and oxidative therapies, and they described the response of 107 COVID-19 patients. So it was observational case series, so they had patients coming into their office, they had interventions, and they observed how they did. It was at his family practice in a suburb in Detroit, Michigan. I think it's in Dearborn. And all the patients were seen from February when COVID started through May 2020 diagnosed with COVID. And the testing was either by PCR testing, a swab, or antibody testing. The patients were given orally vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, and iodine. Iodine is bactericidal, virucidal, fungicidal. Iodine's quite extraordinary. Was given to 107 patients. And then IV solutions of hydrogen peroxide, that's the oxidative therapy, and vitamin C IV were given to 30% of the patients. And then 35% of the patients were treated with a shot in a muscle, an intramuscular shot of ozone. And they nebulized hydrogen peroxide, and so there was nebulized hydrogen peroxide with a saline mixture with a little bit of Lugol's iodine, so people were getting this aerosolized into their lungs, and that was used by 85% of the patients. They were followed with COVID testing, and the results that were a total of the 107 patients, 107 patients diagnosed with COVID. They were all treated in this way. There were 3 were hospitalized, and 2 of the 3 were hospitalized before they began these treatments, and only 1 that wasn't hospitalized before they began this treatment required hospitalization. Nobody required intubation. Nobody died. Most got better after 4 to 5 days. The average healing time was a little under 7 days. The conclusion was at present there is no published cure, treatment, or prevention for COVID-19, except for washing your hands, socially distancing, wearing a mask, etc., or the recent report on dexamethasone, the severe, strong anti-inflammatory for serious ill patients. And some doctors are giving it orally and some are nebulizing a different form of an anti-inflammatory. But he used a novel treatment combining nutritional and oxidative therapies were shown to be successful in 100% of 107 patients diagnosed with COVID. This was published by David Brownstein and several of the people that work with him. The title was A Novel Approach to Treating COVID Using Nutritional and Oxidative Therapies, Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law. So look at that. He was shut down for discussing this on his website because he's been treating viruses. Him and Dr. Wright and many of my colleagues have been using interventional IVs and natural therapies to treat very sick illnesses. But when he started to discuss that this might be applicable for COVID, he was shut down. So what did he do? He went and got this published in a journal. And what did he say? Out of 107 patients got well. So this is something for you to think about. Something for you to maybe print out just in case you might get ill in the future, but why not take a number of these things prophylactically before you get ill? I just think that needed to be told. It's a story that needs to be told because he was shut down and there's so much censorship right now. It's crazy. There's doctors who are forbidden to use hydroxychloroquine. And in fact, there's a big lawsuit now about that. There's a lot of politicizing and censoring and all kinds of strange shenanigans going on. So it's important for us to have dialogues about what's working and what you might do then yourself. So you might consider a lot of these interventions, and if you do get really ill, you might consider taking some of them with some of the other interventions that doctors use. But it seems like at this point, more and more people should not be having more serious responses to this virus, in my opinion. Of course, nothing works for everybody, and you need to work with a doctor that knows how to use these interventions. Some of these were oxidative, and you might say, oxidative, how do I even talk about that to my doctor? So your doctor has to have that ability in their tool bag. That's why knowledge is power. I'm excited to be launching my membership this week, so please go to drlindseyberkson.com and take a look and peek at it if you're interested in hanging out with me and being able to ask me questions and do stuff with me. We've got 3 different levels, but I was very glad to hang with you. I'm going to go from here to go to Quarry Lake behind my gym and go swimming before I come back and work on some other slideshows of some presentations I'm doing. So trying to achieve balance in my life. Work, swim, work, play, comedy on the rowing machine, work. Graciousness, acceptance, zinc with ionophoric hamburger helpers. It's been really nice hanging out with you for this time and space. Be well, my friends. Be well. Bye-bye.